Hey scrollers, remember this from part 4? As you can see, I didn't do a very good job at that. That cut didn't come out very successfully. Yeah, that wasn't one of my prouder moments. But here in part 5, what we're going to do is we're going to fix that. We're going to turn that monstrosity of a mess into this. That pretty much is a good gap. So if you want to see how I fixed it, you got to keep watching.
In order to explain the repair I'm going to make on my little boo-boo of my cutting of the piece for the Intarsia Seashell series, I wanted to use a graphical representation as opposed to trying to hold the two little pieces of wood together and show you the gap and point at it and all that crazy stuff. It just wouldn't have worked out very well. So I went ahead and used the pattern that I originally made, and I added this red line to it. This red line is basically, as close as I could get, a representation of the actual cut that I made on the piece number 2. As you can see here, I've got some rather significant gaps here and a smaller gap here. Now, had I cut this perfectly and had this little bit of gap here, it's so hard to see that I probably would not have gone through this procedure to fix it. But being we got the big boys over here, it's got to be fixed. This is piece number 1, which is the original piece. We don't want to mess with this piece too much. This is the piece we're trying to match number 2 up to. So any repairs that are going to be made are actually going to be made in piece number 2. So when we actually cut, only piece number 2 is going to be cut, not 1 and 2 together, because there's nothing wrong with 1. We'll just use 1 as a guide for our blade to help fix number 2. However, in order to do this, there's something we need to think about, and that is our blade itself. See, our blades are made, most of them are typically stamped, and they have a set to the right that pulls the blade to the right as you're cutting. It's just, natural, the way the blade's made. It wants to drift to the right. So you normally have to compensate for that by holding your wood to the left. In this case, I want to use that drift to my advantage. I want the blade, the left half of the blade, to ride along piece number 1 so that it's not actually cutting into number 1. The right half of the blade will be cutting into number 2. Now, I've got this little green rectangle thing here. That's going to represent my blade. So what we're going to want to do when we put this on the saw, we're going to want our blade to come in here through this open gap. We don't want to cut anything here. We just want to bring it up to the high point. At the high point, the blade will cut that piece, and then it'll get into open space, and we'll come back to this one. We'll cut this and open space until we get up to here, and then we'll run it all the way through and out. We're going to have to do this a few times. What I find useful is the bigger the gap you have, the thicker blade you want to use so that you don't have to do it so many times. If I was just dealing with the small gap here, I'd probably run a 2/0 or a number 1 blade for this repair. But being I've got these monster huge, Grand Canyon gaps here, I'm going to put a number 5 blade on so that I don't have to do this pass several times. If I tried to do this, what I've got here with a 2/0 or number 1, I'd have to do, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe even 5 passes to get all these high points knocked down, because the kerf of the blade, the thickness of the blade is so thin, it wouldn't do much. So with a number 5 blade, I'm hoping I can do it in 2 passes, at the most 3. Enough of me talking about it. Let's go ahead and get over to the saw and see what we can do.
If you're not completely familiar with how blades are made, the left side of the blade is typically flat and smooth. Due to the manufacturing process of stamped blades, the right half of the blade actually does a little more cutting than the left half does, and that naturally creates a pull to the right. So anytime you're scroll sawing, you're constantly trying to guide your piece of wood into the blade like steering a car. So that's important here because I want to use the left half of the blade as my guide. I don't actually want to cut this wood here. I just want it to rest and be a guide because, as I said before, there's nothing wrong with this piece. I really don't want to do any cutting into it. I want all the cutting to be done on the bad piece. So now when I cut, the blade will be guiding against number 1 and the cutting will be done on number 2 because again this is where the actual cutting occurs. Another thing I'm going to do is just to help a little bit with the holding it, I'm going to put a couple pieces of tape back here. Yes, the pieces of tape are going to be cut through, you know, but it just helps a little bit with holding, because that is the biggest challenge to this, is holding the pieces together firmly while you're cutting it. So let me put a couple pieces of tape on here. As you can see, I've got the tape on now just to avoid any confusion. So it'll be easier to start from the top and come down this way as opposed to the way I showed on the animation of the blade coming up through the bottom. One more thing that I need to mention is that if for some reason you wanted to start at the bottom and go up as opposed to starting from the top, you simply turn the wood over and now you've still got your number 1 piece on the left and number 2 piece on the right, and go ahead and make your cut. It doesn't make one bit of difference as long as your blade is perfectly parallel to the table. I did change my blade to a Flying Dutchman Ultra Reverse number 5, just in case you are wondering. So I think we're ready to cut now, so let's go ahead and see what happens. Okay, when making these cuts, it really does take a firm grip. Right now I'm keeping my left blade on the edge. I can see number 2 is being cut. And we're approaching the first gap. The blade's going to go right through there without a problem. It's not cutting anything. Now we're back into the wood again. You can see all I'm getting is white sawdust because the sycamore is lighter than the butternut, so we're getting, well, mostly white wood here. Now we're into another gap. We'll just ride right through that. We'll hit this gap. And come and do the last gap. I'll hold it together. And out. Okay, here's the results of the first cut. As you can see, we're much better here. This gap is gone. Totally. Okay, we still have some more work to do here. So this is going to take 1 more, possibly 2 more tries to get these gaps out of here. They were easy enough to hold together. I'm not going to put tape on them again. This time I think I'll put my blower down there so that we actually do blow the dust away, and makes it a little easier for me to see. Didn't have it there last cut. Yeah, it's much tighter this time going through this area. Whoops. That's going to happen. See, if I had put the tape on there, that might not have happened. Okay, now we just line it back up again, make sure we're right. Okay, and keep going. And keeping the left blade on piece number 1, the right blade into 2. We're into another gap again. Yeah, this is definitely going to take a 3rd try. Okay, we're staying on the left side, left half, and getting ready to come out. Okay, let's take another look at it. With each pass it's getting better and better. See, again, this is perfect, and it'll remain perfect unless I mess up. We still have a little bit of gap here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. This next pass should definitely take care of that, so let's go ahead and get it done. Keeping firm pressure on the two pieces of wood. Not killing myself, but it does take a little bit of strength. Main thing is concentration. Just keep the left half of the blade on piece number 1 and everything will turn out perfect. So we're coming through the gaps. Much quicker, much easier. Making the last little turn here. Still cutting into piece number 2. And there we have it. Yeah, there we go. That's looks pretty good to me. If you really wanted to, you might want to do it one more time. But for being this just a simple seashell, I'm not going to worry about it. The other thing is when you have little teeny tiny gaps now, like we've got here, and here, and here, when you glue up, as long as you've got glue spread nice and evenly on the entire half of the piece, the glue will fill those little gaps right up and you won't even see them. So I think that was we accomplished something there, and we're ready to move on now. Hey scrollers, I went ahead and pulled the pattern off of piece number 2. I thought you might be able to see the actual gap better, and as you can see, that pretty much is a good gap. I am very happy with that gap and would use that on any piece. I also took the liberty of sanding the back of it so you can see what it looks like sanded. So let me just grab it, flip it over, and as you can see, once it's sanded, there is virtually no gap there. It's pretty much invisible. The only thing that lets you know that there's two different pieces of wood is the color of the wood and the grain. And that's what we're striving for throughout pretty much most of our Intarsia pieces. As you saw, the process for doing this, that's a little time consuming. You know, it's a few extra steps. But to get a result that you're looking for that will impress not only you but everybody that sees it, it doesn't hurt to take the few extra steps required to get a quality piece of work. There's nothing better than when you put that last coat of finish on your piece and it just pops and comes to life and just looks beautiful. And then when you show it to people, the looks on their faces when they see it for the first time is inspiring. And that's what keeps me doing it, because every time I show somebody one of the pieces of my work, it's just a look on their face that you simply can't describe, and it motivates me to do more. Well, anyway, everybody, I hope this lesson helped, and as always, happy scrolling.